The last time I spoke from this pulpit, I had just thrown up in the bathroom downstairs. I was pregnant and very sick, but I knew I had to walk through the doors of Middle Church because walking through those doors is like coming home. Where else could you hear a spell from Harry Potter cast within the walls of a church? Expecto Patronum. Thank you, Chris. I'm back now with my son downstairs in the arms of my parents because I want him to feel like what it feels like to be home in community. The hot winds of the world are raging. My grandfather would recite a Sikh prayer, Tati vana lagi padram shanai, the hot winds of the world, the hot winds of fear and hate and xenophobia and violence, they are raging. You feel them. You are here because you feel them. But inside of the doors of this church, we seek safe haven with one another. We come home, we touch down on the love that forms a ground beneath all of us. That's why I'm here. Because as much joy as my son gives me, and yes, I have felt that warmth all over my dress in times past. As much joy and warmth as my son gives me. On the day he was born, even as I held him in my arms, there were people marching on city streets across this country, protesting the violence against black and brown bodies, their hands up, shouting, "I can't breathe." Because when my son was only 8 weeks old, I had to wrap him up in blankets and hold him in my arms in the cold month of February and take him to his first vigil, mourning the lives of 3 Muslim students shot execution style in the head in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and I couldn't breathe. Because when my son turned 1, and I was with Reverend Lewis and our other faith leaders on a retreat, I left early in order to catch a flight home to be with him on his first birthday, and as I was boarding the plane and watching the screen flicker news of the shooting in San Bernardino and tweeting my condolences, there was a passenger behind me who saw my breast pump and thought it was a bomb. I had to open up the bag to show the passengers and the flight attendants that I was not a terrorist. Because on the day after Christmas, the day after we put out milk by the fireplace like my parents used to and built a gingerbread house, I sat on the bed with my husband sobbing because another elderly, sick grandfather walking across the street in my hometown of Fresno, California, was beaten, bloody, collarbone broken. This is a town where my family has lived for more than 100 years. My grandfather settled in Fresno, California 100 years ago, and the man who beat him yelled, "Why are you here?" My son will have to answer the question 100 years later, why are you here? Because just before we boarded the plane, with my father and my mother, who I see here, to come to New York City to be with you all in Middle Church, my father was walking my son along the ocean when a white man approached him and called the baby carrier he was wearing the vest of a suicide bomber. My son was at my father's feet. I cannot protect my father. I cannot protect my son from the hot winds of the world. I called my husband and I said, as soon as my father told me the story, we have to move. We have to move right now. And he said, where would we go? Where would we go? The hot winds of the world are raging all around us. Tati vaunalagi, padbram shanai, the prayer that my grandfather recited to me, Tati vaunalagi, but the hot winds my grandfather taught me, the hot winds cannot touch you when you are shielded by the divine, when you have love in your heart. And so this is the prayer I recite to my son every time I put him to bed. Tati vanalagi prad brahmshanai. The hot winds cannot touch you. I need this prayer now more than ever, because in the first year of my son's life, the year 2015, the Southern Poverty Law Center called the year of 2015 the year of enormous rage. For the first time in 5 years, the number of hate groups in the United States increased by 14%. Sikh and Muslim Americans have been 5 times more likely to be targets of hate violence than they were before 9/11. But since the attacks in Paris and San Bernardino and Brussels, that number has increased threefold. We know that the lives of Sikhs and Muslims are vulnerable, that our bodies are fragile every time we walk down the street, even by the sea with our grandchildren. That's what it feels like to be Sikh or Muslim in America, to be seen by people who snatch a stereotype and cage you within it, so that Sikhs and Muslims are now seen, we are seen as perpetually foreign. 100 years in this country, perpetually foreign, potentially terrorists. Open up your bag, ma'am. Is that a bomb? Perpetually foreign, potentially terrorists, and automatically suspect. Is that a fake suicide bomber vest? Just as we are seen as potentially terrorists, we know that our brothers and sisters who are black are seen as criminal. We know that our LGBTQI brothers and sisters are seen as deviant. We know that our Latino brothers and sisters are seen as illegal, just as we know that women are seen as property, that all of us are caged one time or another, our ancestors or ourselves, by stereotypes that divide us, that diminish us, that create a failure of the moral imagination to see ourselves as one another. A time of enormous rage. In January, in Iowa, a Sikh man unfurled a banner that simply said, "Stop hate," at a rally held by, I won't say Voldemort. Because we know Voldemort is about systems of oppression, not individual people. By a man who is afraid. Trump stood there and espoused his policy proposals to specially register all Muslims in the United States, to ban all Muslims from entering the country, to carpet bomb entire cities of Muslim-majority countries, to take out the families of alleged terrorists. That is a GOP frontrunner advocating for a war crime. And as he spewed this vitriol, this man unfurled this banner that simply said, "Stop hate." And of course, we know what happens next. The people around him begin to yell and chant. But you know what? They didn't chant Trump, Trump, Trump as they were told to by their leader. You know what they chanted? USA, USA, USA. This is a vision of an America that is so fueled by fear that it casts out all of us who want a nation grounded in love. That's what it looks like. And that's why, as an activist, when I hold my son in my arms in my worst moments, I feel that I have failed him. Because for 15 years of fighting hate crimes against my community and other communities, what we are seeing today, we wouldn't have even seen in the aftermath of 9/11. Whatever bipartisan consensus against Islamophobia that existed 15 years ago has all but collapsed. The hot winds of the world are raging. So what do we do? My Sikh faith is a faith rooted in love. The story of the Sikh faith, the founder, Guru Nanak, in the year 1469, disappeared by a river for 3 days. People thought him a dead man, a drowned man, but he emerged with a revelation, with a vision of unity. Nako Hindu, Nako Musliman. There is no Hindu, there is no Muslim. Beneath all these husks and labels, we are one. And Guru Nanak began to sing. I see Michael Ray here. When Michael Ray sings, the ego in me grows quiet. And I am lifted up into an experience of oneness. Even just for a moment, that is what Sikh prayer and music and poetry, worship, that's what it's all about, to lift you up into an experience of oneness where the ego, the home, the I that names itself grows quiet. You are lifted up, and when you are returned to the earth, Guru Nanak says, you don't stay up there. You return to the earth, and you walk in love. I see no stranger, says Guru Nanak, because when you are in love, you see with new eyes. You see the faces of people who are different from you and say, brother, sister, I cannot live if you are dying. I cannot stand by if you are suffering. Guru Nanak says, if you want to play the game of love with me, then come forth with your head on your hand. With your head on your hand. You see, the game of love is not safe. The game of love is not comfortable. The game of love is dangerous business. It means facing the hot winds of the world with the saint's eyes and warrior's heart and walking into them. It means we have to leave even the doors of this church on Sunday afternoon, leading with love. Tati vana lagi, and the hot winds will not touch you. That is what my faith teaches. Could that be the antidote to this time? What do we mean by love that is revolutionary? I think we need to be serious. I think we need to roll up our sleeves. I think this can't be touchy-feely, feel good. I think this is dangerous business, so we must be serious like warriors who don't go into battle unarmed. We go with our sword and shield. We go with our fellow soldiers to fight the good fight. So what are we fighting with and what are we fighting for? What does revolutionary love look like? I see 3 dimensions I want to workshop with you all. Love for others. So this is the sandpaper of relationship. This is drawing close to others who we don't know. I like to call it to draw close to the storyteller's mouth, to listen to their story, to understand what is at stake for them, and to ask yourself, what is my role in your flourishing? Love for others requires solidarity out there. A lot of us feel like we're pretty good at this. We could be better. But I feel we've made progress in this, in our movement. The second dimension is love for opponents. This is why we don't call Trump Voldemort. This is why, however we may be tempted, this is why Chris loves his racist grandfather. This is why Gandhi and King talked about loving your enemy. Because as they taught, there is no one so fallen that they do not have goodness in them. That our job is not to vanquish oppressors, to destroy our opponents, but to change the systems that produce them, the structures of injustice, the cultures of violence, to free them as we free ourselves. That is what love looks like. And we have inherited that tradition from Gandhi and King and from our faith leaders in our scriptures. Guru Nanak to Jesus. The third dimension, love for ourselves. This is what Mickey talked about. And I am going to be so bold to say that Gandhi and King, they didn't quite get this. That Gandhi, in fact, was an ascetic, that he took on the woes of the world on his shoulders because there was still ego in him that felt responsible, that he needed to do it himself and do violence even to his own body and spirit in order to serve others. But we know black women and girls especially, who have been bearing the brunt of oppression, but also the brunt of our struggles for liberation. We know that this is a feminist addition to what makes love revolutionary. We know that if we don't love ourselves, and by ourselves we mean our bodies, but also our spouses, our partners, our children, our parents, our friends, if our homes do not embody revolutionary love, then it is not revolutionary. It does not last. A gentleman asked yesterday, how do we define love? What do we mean? King talks about this. He says that love is not some kind of sentimental outpouring, that the kind of love he wants us to practice is agape, a redemptive goodwill toward all beings. Gandhi says that ahimsa, nonviolence, is the greatest form of love. This is my working definition. I want to share with all of you. It is a wellspring of care, meaning it's endless, it's pouring out. It's a wellspring of care. It's an awakening to the inherent dignity and beauty of the world, of others, people, of animals, of the planet. It is a quieting of the ego. The ego grows quiet. When I held my son in my arms for the first time, I looked at him and I knew that I would give my life for him. And in that moment, I looked at my mother with new eyes. And I saw, for the first time, I saw all the ways that she had poured, that you have poured your body, your breath, your blood into me from my birth to Kavi's birth. All this time, I thought that you were sacrificing to give me the life that you were denied. My mother had an arranged marriage at 18, and my father is loving and beautiful and kind, but I know that you weren't able to pursue the kind of life you wanted, and so you let me free. All this time, I thought I wasn't supposed to be like you, until my son was born. And I realized that you were teaching me the kind of love that our world needs, the kind of love so deep that you would give your life for it, the kind of love so unconditional that it is an endless wellspring of care. It is an awakening. It is a quieting of the ego. It is endless, and it makes you brave. God, it makes you brave. It's a way to move through the world in relationship, as Mickey spoke about. It is meaning that we always ask, what is your story? What is at stake? And what is my part in your flourishing? My mother has never stopped asking me that question. And I keep thinking, if we can just take a fraction of that kind of love out there, in places where the blood is still fresh on the ground, at the doors of our prisons, at the gateways to our schools, in the halls of power, what would that love look like? What could it do if it was love, that kind of love for others, for our opponents, and for ourselves in the movements that we build. I think that kind of love is revolutionary. When we work together in that kind of love to change culture and policy, I believe it creates the kinds of conditions that are required for lasting political, social, and moral transformation. I want to show you what this looks like in my life and work. Last night, I spent time with some of you, and I listened to your longings, and so I offer you these stories with the hope that it gives you what you've come for. Chapter 1. Nadine and Jenny, where are you? Joseph and Anita. Nadine and Jenny, you came here to Middle because you were hungry for stories. You were hungry to hear the stories that would help you find your place in the world, in the movements around you. And Joseph and Anita, you came here because you were hungry for connection. And so this chapter is for you. I am in a car and I'm holding a list of questions and my knuckles are white. I look outside of the car window and there are the fields of Punjab, India, flying past me. My parents are in the car with me. They are here to accompany me. I've flown all the way across the world for one last interview in my first film. We go past villages and past these villages, houses, and past these houses, finally a single house, and there she is wearing white, the color of mourning. The year is 2001, and this woman is a widow. And when I sit next to her and I weep with her, I look at my list of questions and I throw them away. Remember, love is about moving through the world. What is your story? What is at stake? I threw those questions away, and I wept with her. This woman had just lost her husband, Balbir Singh Sodhi, who was the first man killed in a hate crime after September 11th in Phoenix, Arizona. He was the first of more than 24 people killed in the year-long aftermath and countless people in the 15 years since then. When I was traveling across the country, I could feel the kind of anger and rage that I felt like she must have felt, that when I was going from home to home, from city to city, sometimes when the blood was still fresh on the ground, and listening to stories of people who were surviving the hate. And as the camera spun 180 degrees on me, as people began to see me as suspect, as terrorist, as foreign, I began to feel that anger rise within me, the Voldemort that's in our head, right? And so I asked her only one question. I said to this widow, what would you tell the people of America? What would you tell the people of America? And she said, thank you. Tell them thank you. When I came to America for my husband's funeral, they came out in the thousands, Christian, Jew, Muslim, Sikh, it didn't matter. They came and they wept with me. They cried with me. They healed me. They loved me. And that love healed this woman's heart. When I came back to the US, I realized that the people of Phoenix had heard Balbir Singh Sodhi's story in a way that the rest of the country hadn't. That they knew that he had come to America to escape religious persecution, that he wore his turban as a sign of his faith, that he would never see the eyes of his grandchildren, that his widow's heart was now broken. And that story was enough for people to show up, to take their faith outside of the doors of the church and stand in solidarity with and for one another. And that love has power. It had power. And how did we get there? It's because we were able to move through the world in a way that helped us listen to one another's story. And when we listen to stories like that, stories that break down the wall between us and them, they have the power to change the world. Chapter 2. This is for Athena, Michael, and Tony. Athena, Michael, and Tony, who came here longing for new language. Where are you? Raise your hands. You came here longing for new language, for new strategy with a beginner's mind. This is for you. I am sitting behind the bars of a jail in New York City. Love is not safe. Love is dangerous. I'm sitting behind bars just a few miles away from here. In the year 2004, the Republican National Convention, I had come to show solidarity. I was swept up in the protest. An officer had twisted my arm. I lost feeling in my hand. And as I was lying behind bars, I was thinking that stories alone aren't going to set me free. I need to know how to wield them strategically. I need to become more powerful. I need my sword and shield. So I went to law school. And that detention center that I was held at was called Guantanamo on the Hudson. And so naturally, I took a course on Guantanamo. And naturally, my professor sends me to Guantanamo to report on the military commissions. And I said yes. I said yes, even though I was still plagued by nightmares of the police officer who hurt me, the NYPD officer who twisted my arm, who left me with years of chronic pain. I said yes, even though I was scared to go to this place where they, to me, held the most oppressive detention center of all. I arrive on Guantanamo, and Guantanamo, Cuba, is beautiful. There are blue waters and rocky hills and clear blue skies, and there's an Irish pub and a tennis court and a paintball station, and just over the hill is the detention center. And the dissonance broke me. Just as there are shopping malls down the street from Supermax prisons, the dissonance at Guantanamo broke me. And I was sitting in the Irish pub with a beer, trying to calm my nerves. The only people I could talk to were the soldiers, and I didn't want to look them in the eye, because when I looked them in the eye, I saw the officer who hurt me. How could they stand, keys in their hands, in front of these cells? And they told me that they were the ones who were trapped. They told me that they were the ones who were captive. And I resented hearing that. How dare they? I showed up to the commission, which I was there to report on, and in was Omar Khadr, the 15-year-old who was captured on the fields of Afghanistan, who came of age in Guantanamo. There he was just a kid. And there were the soldiers next to him, and I realized Omar Khadr was only 22. And the soldiers next to them, they were 18, they were 20. And me, I was still a kid. I was a student. And here, the prisoner and the soldiers and the one called to bear witness, we were all young. We all inherited wars and systems not of our own making. That we are all trapped by systems of oppression, no matter where we find ourselves, no matter if we realize it, we are all captive. Our generation, this generation, yours and mine. When I returned to law school, I realized there was a Supermax prison just down the street from Yale that held men in conditions of solitary confinement that rivaled the ones that I had left behind at Guantanamo. There is a Supermax prison in almost every state in this country, entire facilities designed to hold people in isolation. They were called the worst of the worst, but most of them were nonviolent offenders. And I began a year-long project investigating that prison, but instead of just talking to the prisoners, we listened to the stories of the correctional officers, the ones holding the keys. And Pete and Mark, they told me about the high depression rates, the high suicide rates, how when they walk into that prison and they're asked to look after men as if they were animals, it makes them feel like animals. We made a film called The Worst of the Worst that presented the stories of all of those who walked through those walls. And because we told the full story, stories that break down the walls between us and them. They have power, right? Because we told this full story. By the time we released the film and Yale released a report, you know what happened? The Department of Corrections listened. They emptied out the prison. 400 people gone. And my nightmares stopped. By the end, it took years, but I no longer hated the police officer who hurt me. I realized then that forgiveness is not forgetting. Forgiveness is freedom from hate. And once we are free from hate, then we have the creative energy and the moral vision to go after the systems that entrap all of us. Chapter 3. For Aisha, Karen, and Tina, where are you? You asked for strategy last night. You asked for sources of moral courage last night. So this is my final big story. This story is for you. I am standing inside of the Sikh Gurdwara of Oak Creek, Wisconsin. And there is blood on the floors, in the carpets. There are shattered windows. There are bullet holes in the walls. The mass shooting had just happened, but the Sikh community said no to the FBI when they asked them if they could clean it up. They said, this is our house of God. We will clean it up. And so, as I sat there at the site of massacre, on August 5th, 2012, a white supremacist walked in and killed 6 people on a Sunday morning in a house of worship as sacred as this one. As I stood there in this place of massacre, and I felt that Voldemort in me grow, right? It's always there. It's always beckoning to you. As I felt the other men and women who had been there and survived the shooting, they came through those doors. Sikh men and women, they rolled up their sleeves, they turned on the prayers, and they began to clean up. They pulled out the blood-soaked carpets, they repaired the windows, they painted over the bullet holes, they left just one at the entrance of the prayer door that said, we are one, oneness, ik onkar, we are one. The media cameras, they didn't stay in Oak Creek long enough. They weren't there the Sunday after the shooting when the community gathered in the space to pray. They weren't there when the community prayed, not just for the souls of every person who was killed by the shooter, but also the soul of the gunman. They weren't there when they saw the police officer, and this is why it was so good that I did my forgiveness work with my police officer. They weren't there when the police officer who took 15 bullets protecting my community that day, Lieutenant Brian Murphy, was willing to give his life for people who did not look like him. Love so deep you would give your life for it. Lieutenant Brian Murphy, my hero, he sat with us, he prayed with us as we mourned a rupture in our community, the greatest act of bloodshed my community, the Muslim community, has experienced in more than a century on this soil. Courage is possible in community. And because we prayed together, it returned us to love, it returned me to love, it freed us from hate. And even though the media trucks were gone, we knew, you asked about strategy, we have online tools now in the palm of our hand that allows us to have voice, to tell our stories, to organize in ways that were never possible before. Never possible before. Facebook and Twitter and YouTube are not just for cat videos. These you know. You know that for the first time we have voice because of these platforms. And the Sikh community, with so many allies like you, we organized for a year to ask the US government to track hate crimes against Sikhs, Arabs, and other minorities. Because for all of these years, can you imagine, the government has not even measured the problem. How can you respond to a problem you're not even measuring? It took a butchering and it took a year of organizing to add a box on a form. Change is incremental, but I want to say that change was revolutionary. It would not have happened unless we organized like we did, unless Harpreet Singh Sahni, who was a son who lost his mother in that shooting, unless he took his story to the halls of power. He became the first Sikh in U.S. history to testify. He told those senators about his mother, how he ate the last bit of food she had prepared after she had died and realized he would never taste her food again. There was not a dry eye in the room. He asked those senators to give his mother the dignity, at least the dignity of being counted. The dignity of being counted in death, in a way she was not in life. And you know what was different? He wasn't alone. Behind Harpreet, there was a room that looked like you. Black, Latino, Muslim, gay, straight, Christian, Muslim, Jew. It was the movement. And they were all there because they knew that we share a moral imperative to end hate and violence in this country, to end racism, that we want a world where all of us can live, work, and worship without fear, and we don't get there if we fight alone anymore. We get there if we fight together. And we get there if we're strong and strategic about the tools that we fight with, which is why for the last 2 years, I've been fighting for something called net neutrality. Does anyone know what net neutrality is? Yes! Oh, I love you all. Jackie, you have an amazing church. Net neutrality, this vision of an internet where no matter the color of our skin or the size of our wallets or the content of our beliefs, that we have the ability to reach people. We fought for that. We won that in this country. I fought for that. I took a break from the traditional civil rights issues of our day to fight for that because I knew that my life would not be possible if it weren't for what I want to call a new kind of magic, Chris. The wand, the internet, which can be used for, arming with the Dementors, or it could be used to fight hate with love, to expel our spells, to cast our spells of light and liberation. It's time to be savvy about how to use these tools. That's why I'm here at Middle. That's why I'm a scholar in residence. Thank you, Jackie. To fight for you, to fight with you, because the way we make change is just as important as the change we make. For Storm, Forge, and Jean Ray, you know who you are, Jackie and Michael Ray. This last chapter is for you. I was 16 years old and banging on the door of the church asking to be let in. It was a Sunday morning and I had left my grandfather behind at the Gurdwara down the street. I had left him behind because I could not stand sitting there anymore without doing anything. You see, I grew up in a mostly white Christian community in Fresno, and I was told I was going to hell. I was told my whole family was going to hell. I had nightmares of Judgment Day. And my grandfather, who had always taught me to be brave, I didn't understand why we would just be sitting there on a Sunday morning when the priests down the street were sitting in pulpits like this, damning us. And so I got up in my silvar kameez, and I marched down the streets of Fresno, and I banged on the doors of the first church I could find, because I wanted an answer. I was hungry for love. And as soon as I banged on those doors, I thought, what am I doing? And the doors opened, and a slight Christian woman stood there, and I looked behind her, and the pews were empty. It turns out Indians we worship a lot later than you all. She's like, can I help you? And I said, And she said, I'm just practicing the organ. Do you want to come and listen to me practice? And I sat in those pews trying to figure out a way to get out. When the organ began to play, and the full-throated chorus of the organ was like 1,000 birds leaving a tree all at once, and then it began to swell and dip and waver in my heart, and it became the sound of the harmonium, the sounds that I just left behind in the Gurdwara. And then I was going back through time, or perhaps up through heavens, I couldn't tell, but there he was. There was Jesus. There was a man who I always thought condemned me. There he was with his arms outstretched. His smile wise and wide like the sea, and his head was over me, and he was embracing me, and I became nothing, and he was nothing, and there were nothing but the lines from his hands crisscrossing a tapestry of blue and gold over me. Ik on God, God is one over the entire world. Did you all see what just happened there? I had my first spiritual experience in a church. I had come to Jesus, but he wasn't going to send me to hell. He opened the door. The organist stopped playing and looked at me sobbing and said, "Can I help you, child?" And I said, "I just can't believe in a God who would hate me." And I was ready. But she said, "I don't either. God is love." She was the first Christian I ever met in my whole life who thought I was worthy of love. Storm and Forge, to be with you in the world, to feel your love across lines of difference, to be in this multi-faith movement for justice in a church like this, with a congregation like this. Your love has saved me. And I know that what my grandfather taught me and what I'm whispering to my little boy in my father's arms is true. The hot winds of the world cannot touch you. The hot winds of the world cannot touch you when you lead with love. Thank you.